Okay.
Good evening, folks. This is what we call the Short Show, your weekly wake up call. And we hope you will wake up soon, because here's Dave.
So, okay, recently I had a conversation with someone in regards to different groups and what groups to support and all of that kind of thing. If you don't know already, I have been a union rep for almost 15 years. And one thing that I know is that just because you are not in a social group or, whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that you can't organize those people and get them together and fight for common causes. So what I did do is I made a mistake, and I talked about a group and said that I questioned their economic decisions recently. But I did more research on it, and it reminded me of another group. So what groups am I talking about? I'm talking about Acorn, which disbanded in 2010, and I'm talking about BLM, or Black Lives Matter. And Black Lives Matter, in all honesty, is more a movement than a group. But let's get into it real quick. Acorn was around for 40 years, started in 1970, and was disbanded in 2010 because of lack of funding, because of a bill that took away their government funding after a smear campaign by right-winger James O'Keefe, and also after some political posturing by the right-wingers and by the GOP. And why was that? Because Acorn in 2008 supported Barack Obama, and the person who ran against him, John McCain, he claimed that they rigged ballots. Now there were a very few that were invalidated. However, most of them, if not all of them, were invalidated by Acorn themselves. So most of the allegations made that disbanded them were absolutely false. Did they have issues? Did they have issues with bookkeeping? Yes, they did. Did they have some issues with some corruption here or there? Yes, they did. But in 2010, they disbanded. Shortly thereafter, there was Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman, that situation, which spurred on some people to create a saying, Black Lives Matter. And over time, that turned into a movement, specifically after George Floyd. And after the George Floyd incident, Black Lives Matter exploded and became one of the largest, if not the largest, movement in American history. And there's a reason for that, because it was needed, especially after Acorn was disbanded. So what happened once it became so large, they were hit with smear campaigns, and also they became so big and they didn't have enough full-time workers at the time. They didn't have the infrastructure to handle the amount of money that they had brought in. They brought in $90 million over a very short period of time. So what happened was they gave some grant money to some organizations, and some people misappropriated those funds, and they're being charged. But the people who are in charge of Black Lives Matter, they are being targeted at this point, especially given the things that they have done. And there are some very positive things that have come out of the BLM movement. mostly having to do with issues against African Americans and politically organizing for politicians who are friendly towards the African American population. So, what has happened after this? Let me just say a couple things about the positives. Okay, they have shifted public opinion, according to a Pew study. Shifted the public opinion of whites, saying that 54% of white people viewed officer-involved shootings involving black people to be signs of a broader problem, as opposed to before. So they're ushering in a series of organizational changes to policing, bring light to an inordinate amount of money spent on policing and civilian payouts on police brutality that come out of taxpayer pockets. Federal oversight for cities like Ferguson, Louisville, Baltimore, and Minneapolis. Altering data collection efforts in academy, police departments, and federal government to better assess what law enforcement policies do and do not work, due to reduce racial disparities. So that's some of the positives. Some of the negatives is, as I said, there were some misappropriation of funds and some bad looks. And over time, BLM has tried to take a look at it, try to change things, and try to improve their organization. They had two full-time workers at one point, and over 1,000, actually maybe over 2,000 volunteers. That's not a good structural, that's not a good structure for an organization that big. So what has happened is now you have right-wing pundits like Candace Owen and Kanye West coming out with an anti-Black Lives Matter, quote-unquote, documentary. By the way,
black people, by the way.
Right.
Two of the biggest Uncle Toms on the planet, in my opinion.
Right. You have Kanye West, who's buying Parler, and guess who Candace Owen is married to? She's married to the CEO of Parler. So here's what I'm saying. Originally, I questioned whether or not I would, quote unquote, support BLM. I support any group that will help organize and help people in need, whether it be the Human Rights Campaign or human rights, or you have the Southern Poverty Law Center, or you have all of these different groups. You may not be included in them, but trust me, they are necessary. Also, unions are extremely necessary because they bring all of these people together with a common goal for a better, safer, more productive work environment. Most people are an average of 1/3 of your day is spent working in the workplace, and that's not including travel to and from work. So just think about that, and also think about listening to people who are not like you. Guess what? This show wouldn't exist if Deb and I didn't do that. Deb and I are different people. We come from different backgrounds. It can happen. It will happen.
Yep.
Okay? Just listen and just broaden your mind a little bit, and don't just dismiss a group because of your cynicism. It's a bad idea.
The other thing is, you can't listen to the pundits either, because let me just say something. They've spent a lot of time demonizing BLM and Antifa. okay, calling them the violent groups. They're not the violent groups. They're not the ones in the street. They weren't the ones that breached the Capitol. They weren't the ones in Charlottesville. They weren't the ones causing the mess in Kenosha. Okay, those people that caused the problem in Kenosha were not just the Black people, and it certainly wasn't BLM. Okay, did they have growing pains, structural, organizational issues? Yeah, they did. But you know what? I don't want to hear shit from the GOP because, frankly, the GOP is the party that decided to give Rick Scott all of the money in the 2022 midterms to manage that money, and now they're all wondering what the fuck he did with it. So what made them think it was a good idea to give that money to a guy who was once a CEO of a medical company, and he was involved in the biggest Medicare scam of its time? Right. You know, the GOP is nothing short of full of shit. And anybody who acts like their mouthpiece, and that would be Candace Owen and freaking Yeezy.
Okay, Yeezy. Yeah.
Any better. He's cheesy.
There's one difference between, and I know we're past 10 anyway.
Yeah, we're good.
There's one major difference between Acorn and BLM, and that is Acorn was government funded. So they were always vulnerable. But guess what? The Democrats, they were not really in power around the time that this happened, that this power play against Acorn happened. But they, to some degree, disowned Acorn and stepped away from them. Guess what they're doing now? They're calling to reorganize Acorn and see if they can get those people back. How about dealing with what you have now? Now, I understand that Acorn was different. Acorn dealt with monetary issues, with housing. It's different from BLM. But you do need an organization like Acorn to deal with those kinds of things.
Yeah, BLM, that would be too much to put on BLM's plate.
Right.
With everything else they're doing. That's like setting them up for failure.
But at the same time, you cannot ignore BLM or turn your back on BLM. BLM.
They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
They're there for a reason. It's just that the housing,
that's an issue,
is not what they're doing.
That's not what they're doing. They're dealing with police brutality and that kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. So, but at the same time, you can't say that you are, anti-police brutality and turn your back on BLM.
Right.
You can't do it.
Right.
And if you do, you're a hypocrite.
Right.
So Democrats, don't make the same mistake. They're different organizations. They are. Okay. But don't make the same mistake with BLM that you did with Acorn. I do want to thank someone, I'm not going to name the name, but someone on Twitter did spur me on to do more research. So I thank them for that. And all I say is, before you disown a group, especially a civil rights group, look into what you really have a problem with. The problem is they're organizational, but they grew too big too fast. That was their problem.
Yep.
Okay, so that's BLM. But
we don't disband corporations when they do that. We only disband civil rights groups when they do that.
Right.
So there's a difference.
So only BLM is too big to fail, not the banks or whatever.
Right.
So
the other thing is, I'd like to just make a closing statement on Antifa.
Yep.
Antifa isn't even a group. Look it up, okay?
Yep.
Antifa has been around since the 30s, okay? It means anti-fascists. And what that is a very loose ideology, okay? It's an ideology. It is not an organized group with a leader. They respond to fascist things. For example, when the neo-Nazis were on the streets in Jamaica Plain in Massachusetts, Antifa was there. It is This is the way this works, okay? It is not a group. They can call it what they want, the GOP. I'm not even sure the GOP has its head wrapped around that theory because they just can't think solidly. But this is what anti-fascism, and we need Antifa today. We do.
And in all honesty, Black Lives Matter, that's not a group either. It's so decentralized, and it's a movement. It's not a group. It responds to, a police shooting, or an incident.
Right.
So you want to get rid of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter won't matter until they matter.
Right.
And until these issues, you want to disband Black Lives Matter, solve the problem.
You want to disband Black Lives Matter, but you want to let the Proud Boys continue to function, the Oath Keepers continue to function. They're the ones that are going on the streets creating problems. It isn't Black Lives Matter that's creating problems. They're responding to those problems. Okay?
Eliminate hate, eliminate prejudice, eliminate bigotry, and you eliminate the need for movements like Black Lives Matter. Tell me how long that's going to take before that happens.
Forever. Yeah, that'll never happen. That's not a real world situation here in the land of Oz. And I don't mean that in terms of the land of Dr. Oz either. We'll see you guys later on The Long Show.